Okay, welcome back to this second session of the afternoon. This is an interesting session because it is on hybridization, so a process of exchange, and we will have, after my intervention on the healthcare sector, several interesting speakers, outstanding speakers, Professor Konnoth, who will speak about the intersection of medicalized identity and machine. Then Professor Rigazio, who will speak about the love in the web. And then Professor Ferrari, who will speak about AI in the healthcare and the ethical committee perspective. So let's start with my intervention. The topic is healthcare, but I won't start from healthcare. I will start with an experience on overconfidence in artificial intelligence as a news from the world, and in particular, Israel. The head of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, in June 2023, declared that using AI, we have spotted a not inconsequential number of threats. The technology had a secondary role in decision-making, like a partner at the table, a co-pilot. So Israel embraces AI for defense. And also the Major General Eraniv of Israel Defense Force said that I estimate that within a few years, every area of warfare will be based on generative AI information. Without a strong and effective digital basis, no one will be able to prosecute in a war in any area. But what happened, we all know. Just only 4 months later, Hamas fighters launched the largest surprise attack on Israel, and the AI system failed to deliver advanced warning. Then, also worse than this, an algorithmically driven fog of war exploded on the social media channels in Israel, so video and imagery, fake news, to increase the level of emergency and terrorism. So it was a failure of human intelligence, of defense intelligence, isn't it? And please notice that Israel is considered a world leader in AI thanks to burgeoning computing and robotic industries that draw on talent developed in the technology-advanced conscript military. Let's go to the healthcare sector and the landscape and concerns as a news from the European Union. All of you remember the pronunciation of the Court of Justice of the EU in December 2017 about the softwares using patient-specific data to guide the physician as a supporting decision system, which has been defined as medical device. And then we had the Artificial Intelligence Act, which will be published on the official journal of the European Union maybe in the next weeks. We are waiting for May or June, the publication. And the Artificial Intelligence Act established that healthcare-related high-risk systems belongs to 3 main categories: AI systems as components of medical devices, and AI systems which are medical devices by themselves, where a joint regulation is on these medical devices, the application of AI Act and medical device regulation, and then also the standalone AI systems for specific use cases, as for instance, services to evaluate the eligibility of natural persons for essential public services, as they are the healthcare services, or to evaluate and classify emergency calls, as it is in the case of emergency healthcare patient triage systems. But what's the most important invention of the AI Act from my perspective, and maybe from the healthcare perspective? The invention of the regulatory sandboxes. established at Article 57 and 58 of the AI Act, which are environment for multiple stakeholders, cooperation throughout the AI life cycle. But recalling the suggestion from Professor Mantelero before, the idea of these regulatory sandboxes is to prevent, to discover early what could be the risks of AI applications in the healthcare sectors. And the most important idea is that in these regulatory sandboxes, all the stakeholders from institutions to the stakeholders as citizens and end users and producers can cooperate for the best delivery and for the best building of AI systems, in our case, in my case, to be applied in the healthcare sector. The expected benefits from these stakeholders, from these regulatory sandboxes built with the cooperation of stakeholders, are for all the involved people. For the producers, the idea or the expected benefits we hope for these results: less time to market with a shorter authorization process, less regulatory uncertainty, as a less prohibition of new technologies after their invention, and more feedback on regulatory requirements. But also benefits from the consumers in terms of safety and efficacy regarding the products for health and also the services for health. But also benefits for the policymakers, because policymakers can be informed through these environments about experimentations and success of these experimentations and training and evaluations of AI algorithms. But there are main concerns which are related to the preparation, the preparedness of member states in Europe to face or to create these regulatory sandboxes. The law establishes that at least one AI regulatory sandbox at national level should be created for all member states in Europe, but are competent authorities prepared to the increasing market demand for testing AI systems, or have the competent authorities sufficient resources to control safety, effectiveness, security of AI algorithms? Or are they able to manage or to collect a sufficient amount of data, quality data, to train these algorithms? And are they prepared to a standardized approach and methods and criteria to validate these algorithms? This is a question that we don't know right now. And also there are other complexities, which are the interplays with other regulations, the European Health Data Space regulations, which define the roles of health data access bodies, which will be the competent authorities where data will be collected and processed to train algorithms and to test the algorithms and to evaluate the algorithms. And these authorities have the tasks to evaluate what are the data application for training algorithms and to issue the permits to allow the use of data for the training of algorithms and to evaluate the processing into the secure processing environment if these data are health data for sure, are properly used with the right purposes to train, according to the law, the AI algorithms for health applications. Further, we have other emerging concerns in the healthcare sector, which are related to the new perspectives for the medical malpractice systems, where physicians' liability is evaluated based on common medical standards of care right now, but who knows who will be the standards of care when we will have our AI algorithms in the routine clinical practice. So what will be the standards of care in the AI-based decision support system medicine? Who will assume the risks and liability for medical malpractice due to the AI system errors? So these questions also arise before in the first session. We need answers to this, maybe before the use in the clinical routine of these technologies. And we also need trust. This is the third element, the third chapter of this journey, because people are asking for trust. And I would like to show you the results of this very recent literature review that my group and I published very recently and very well on a scientific journal, which is of the Lancet group. This is a systematic review regarding the attitude of people in sharing data for primary and secondary uses, including in the secondary uses also the training of algorithms and the innovation of technologies. So the added value of this review is for sure the knowledge, because it is the first review including the willingness to share, the motivations, the concerns and predictors. And also the capacity, because we screened 2,000 and more articles, and at the end we selected 116 articles that are all reported in this review, and it is also open access, so very available for everybody. But what are the main findings that we need to think about to plan our future, also in proposing and communicating the new technologies? In general, people are very willing to share data for primary use. That means for care, for receiving directly as individual care. But when we are talking about secondary uses, which are related to the application and the uses of data for research, for training algorithms, for political reasons, and so on, the answers of people is not so easy. And people react differently depending on the recipient of data. For instance, the review showed that health professionals and healthcare providers are perceived as most reliable compared to other people, and also non-profit organizations or public institutions received higher support than for-profit and private companies. And this is independent from the type of data, because we analyzed the 4 different categories of data: health personal data, as the electronic health records coming from the hospitals, person-generated data, as the data coming from the wellness app, and also genomic data and biobank data. So independently from the types of data, the reaction of people are the same. What are asking the people? People fundamentally are asking most privacy and security independently from data type, but also the perception and the intention to share data vary in a great way if the people perceive benefits from the sharing data. For instance, improving safety and quality of healthcare, advancing health knowledge, sounds as incentives. And also, they are asking for more awareness on data sharing practices, because they need transparency and reliable privacy and security protections tools to be more confident within their actions to share information. So what are the conclusions? I think that it's very important to work on competence, controlling the overconfidence. And maybe most of you know the Dunning effect Kruger, the graphic, which show at the beginning when for people that start and doesn't have knowledge, that the confidence is at the higher level. And then when they feel competence and the situation is improving, the confidence with their actions and their decision is lower, but just and only at the end, when they become expert, the situation is reliable, is at the best of our expectations. And I have finished my presentation. Thank you. So I would like to invite to the floor Professor Craig Konnoth, and he will speak about the intersection of medicalized identity and machine. Do you need slides?
Yes, I think.
Okay. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. I just want to start by saying thank you. It's so wonderful to be here, and I really appreciate being part of this community. As you can see, I'm enjoying myself with my little cookies and tea and everything. You know, it's just so much better in Italy. And I'm doubly grateful to be here because, you know, in many ways, I'm learning so much because this isn't my primary area of writing. I write on health law. And specifically on medical identity from a somewhat theoretical perspective. So I'm learning so much from an empirical point of view, but also from a subject matter point of view, because you know, this has been so generative, thinking about how AI work intersects with the work that I do. So, you know, while my slides are coming up, I'll, amazing, on cue, thank you. So it really is wonderful to be here. And I warn you in advance, my slides aren't as pretty or as advanced because, you know, I don't know if everyone here uses AI tools to produce their slides. I don't know how to. So, but you know, move on. All right. So basically, what I'm going to do is my main goal here is to think about the relationship between what most of us are calling AI here and the issue of medicalization, the process by which issues are considered to become related to the problems that humans face. Sorry, maybe I'll put it. I think I can project pretty far anyway, so I'll just move the mic there. And so the process by which problems that humans encounter are treated as being the province of medicine, introduced into medical discourse, and made. Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, well. All right. So. It becomes part of medical discourse. And so what I'm first going to do is chat briefly about definitions, then explain what the critique that I'm trying to address is all about, then talk about how that critique is affected by the creation of AI, and in part, and this is really other work, that talks about how medicine engages in what I call the civilization of AI in the United States, or the civilizing of AI in the United States. All right, so I'm going to begin by first talking about definitions. So the definitions, honestly, have been set out already by the folks here already. But I'm going to first explain what kinds of AI and medicine I'm interested about. Of course, AI has numerous applications in medicine. I'm specifically thinking about contexts in which patients directly interact with AI themselves. So I'm not talking about a context where, let's say, a drug company has used AI to produce a drug. The patient is not directly interacting with the AI, or a situation where the doctor is doing the interacting with the AI, right? So that doesn't interest me. But I am interested in situations where the patient, I'm not just talking about implants, right? I'm talking about situations where the patient sort of interacts with their phone or whatever other app with AI technology. I'm obviously not talking about mechanical situations where you would just have a regular dose of a drug, right? I hereby incorporate the many excellent definitions of AI that have already been set on the floor today. So that's the first point. The second the second issue that I want to get at is to talk about the problem that I'm coming at this issue from. So the problem that I've spent a lot of time working on engages with the issue of medicalization and the critique of medicalization. So from the 1960s onwards, many scholars have argued that that the use of medicine and medical discourse in society basically acted as a tool of social control, discipline, and coercion. A prominent exponent of this, if I can cite two French philosophers in Italy, was Michel Foucault, right, who observed towards the end of his life that pathology has become a general tool of social regulation. Similarly, Irving Zola wrote a widely cited essay called "Medicine as a Tool of Social Control, as an Institution of Social Control," where he said that medicine is nudging aside, if not incorporating, religion and law. And that occurs through the medicalizing much of daily living by making medicine relevant to an ever-increasing part of human existence. And we just have numerous examples of this in both a British as well as American context, which I'm the most familiar with, that talk about how numerous issues from baldness to height to attention deficits all become treated as being part of the aging, I should add, all become medicalized, treated as an issue that medicine has to deal with, that doctors have to engage with, and so on. And critiques, of course, came from activists, numerous activists, especially women's rights activists that talk about how women have been medicalized through history, LGBT activists that talk about how gay and lesbian people have been treated as diseased, and so on and so forth. And the critiques generally took one key form. The idea is that medicine imposes control on individuals, doctors tell individuals what they need to do, and law pretends that like it is just following medical advice. And medicine effectively stigmatizes individuals and harms them. Another set of critiques, not so much from these writers, but more generally, has come from institutions that say, well, medicine is not equipped to deal with these problems, that doctors aren't legitimate. They have not been elected. They have not been vetted by society. They have degrees and they've been appointed by some entity, but really we should be looking to democratic bodies to make the real decisions by which we live our lives. And so when we rely on doctors, we are going to ultimately undermine the legitimacy of our legal institutions and undermine the legitimacy of medicine in turn. So this is the broad critique which I have historically been writing in, which must sound quite foreign to the folks in this room because, you know, so far I have said not a word about AI, right? But in the context of AI, we see similar critiques arise when those who engage in medical regulation in the United States argue that medical regimes should control how AI operates and burgeons in the United States. I've been learning a lot about European law here, but I do not pretend to have any expertise there. And many of their critiques sound very similar to the traditional critiques, right? That imposing medical controls in AI contexts limits what people can do. It limits, it effectively controls individuals. It pathologizes them by, you know, if I want to implant myself with a certain device, I've got to claim that I'm diseased in some way to get the FDA to approve the device, and so on and so forth. And so many scholars have argued, a certain breed of scholars, that actually much of AI human interaction, even if it involves certain implantable technology, should not be the province of medical institutions, especially medical agencies in the United States. This is not an area that they are equipped to deal with, or so the claim goes, and that this unfairly limits the way in which individuals, patients can exercise their choice. It unfairly forces them to pretend that they're sick or to claim sickness, and stigmatizes them, and again exceeds medical authority and legitimacy. So the historical critiques that we see from the 1960s have increasingly become imported here. And at the same time, the traditional critiques of medicine remain. If you look at civil rights activists in the United States, they still remain very suspicious of medical authority and see medicine as a tool of social control again, still. In the very early stages of this work, because as I said, I'm still learning a lot, I try and look at how AI has changed what medicalization is, and I believe that there are changes. And at the same time, I argue that medicine, in turn, in the United States, shifts the regulatory regimes and the values that underlie regulatory regimes to which AI is subject. So the first is thinking about how AI has changed what medicalization is. So historically, the classic way in which a patient would intersect with medicine is that you go to the doctor tells you you're sick, right? Tells you what's wrong with you, gives you a substance or engages in a modality that acts directly on your body, right? And even if you are given an external substance, right, the substance you're given is absorbed into your body, becomes a part of you. But what we see with AI is an increasing shift, right? The first important aspect here is that when you have a patient interacting with AI, you've got some kind of bidirectional relationship. Right? So it's not just you're given a drug that you are acted upon as a passive entity, but that you actually are receiving information, you give information back, and you've got this iterative relationship. The example that I plan to use in my paper and draw from heavily is this great article that appeared in the New Yorker that talked about a failed device that gave that involved brain implantation that gave warnings to epileptic patients before they were going to have epileptic fits early enough so that they could take their medication and avoid the fit itself. Unfortunately, the funding for that particular project failed, and many of the individuals with those implants had to have the implants removed since they did not get the support because you know the technology wasn't there. Yeah, it's a whole thing, and so here you've got an example, and there are just numerous examples of this. I know many people here will be familiar with them, of situations where individuals interact with medical AI devices that actually inform the individual as to what's happening, right? And so here you sort of see the empowered patient, right? So that's the person in the Superman cape, right? Where you see the patient who is no longer requiring requiring a doctor to tell the patient what's wrong with them, but they can interact directly and get the information directly. The second point is that the doctor themselves is slowly getting displaced, right? And this isn't news to anyone, but I want to make a couple of points here. One is that we see a situation, right, where the doctor is being displaced by other experts in this field, right? So we aren't just seeing the doctor administering a pharmaceutical, right, or a pharmaceutical product, but we're seeing a situation where you have a range of other professionals who have different expertise from the doctor, who have to intersect with the situation that ends up displacing the centrality of the doctor. But more than that, we see a situation where the patient can, so if you look at various literatures on AI products, for example, in the diabetes context, we see this move from talking about how doctors can rely on the AI and AI support for their practice to how patients can rely on AI and AI support, right? And so what I want to call, if I can dare call this the Protestantization of AI, right? You don't need the intercession of the priest doctor being conscious that I'm 20 kilometers from the Vatican here, right? But basically you don't need that intercession, and that you have the individual able to interact, right? So, but I think and the third point I want to make is that I think it's important that the doctor is not being fully displaced. I don't think anyone in this room thinks that the doctor is going to be fully gone, right? But what you end up seeing is this interaction between theoretically an empowered patient, right, and of course a medical professional. So my claim here is that AI shifts the position of the patient relative to the doctor, unlike other kinds of medical treatments, substances, and devices, right? But the third point I want to make here is that AI creates a change in medical identity specifically. How am I doing in time, by the way? Okay, perfect. And so basically, when you've got an AI product, an AI product tends to be present in a device rather than in any other kind of substance, right? We've already seen a definition of device in the US. A device is defined as an instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, and a reagent, right? Now, a reagent is important because a reagent, unlike a reactant, always remains independent, always maintains its own identity. So if you take a drug, it is a reactant. It combines with the processes in your body, becomes a part of you, right? The reagent doesn't combine with you. And so you've got this independently existing thing in your body. And even patients that have a positive attitude towards their AI product have this sense that there is some other entity in their body. Going back to the example I gave earlier of the epileptic patient with the brain implant, this particular patient was treated it very positively and talked about the strangeness of having a machine communicate with her and advise her what was about to happen in her head, right? And she said that she thought about the device as if it was a partner. As if she was calibrated with this partner, right? And it had a separate existence, but we became one. And then when she had to have the implant removed, for her it felt that she had left, again, a quote, a part of herself behind. But when they worked together, a new person emerged. A quote, de novo identity, a symbiosis of machine and mind. Frederick Gilbert, who is a professor in Quebec, talks about the change in medicalized identities because of AI products. But he talks a lot about the alleviation of symptoms as part of the process and how identity changes. But here I want to actually very sharply separate the alleviation of symptoms with the consciousness of a different identity. Because when you have the alleviation of symptoms, that's true for other kinds of medical products that you can take. And it is true that when you stop being sick, when you feel, when you develop a different relationship with your body, with the disease, there is the sense of change of identity. But that is not actually what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is that unlike other kinds of treatments, we have the separate entity that continues to exist in your body. And I think this is clearly seen with the patients who don't develop or don't find the product to be particularly helpful to them. And if they do not find the product to be helpful to them, or they don't develop the symbiotic relationship with the product, they have what some have described as post-operative self-estrangement and a failure to achieve embodied fusion of self with a device. Some patients have killed themselves, but it's very hard to actually assess this. So Gilbert talks about how when he's tried to run longitudinal studies, the patients who fail to develop identification with the device just stop talking and stop responding to him, go into depression, and he claims, though there isn't firm data on this, that some of them have committed suicide. So what you see is this complex dual identity, this bimodal dual identity among users, in the sense that the bionic device creates a sense of competence, but at the same time, you recognize this device as still being another thing within you. And so you see this unique aspect of medicalized identity being developed because of AI devices. But this means that the effect of AI on medicalization isn't quite as straightforward, right? Yes, it can give a patient a greater sense of control, but at the same time, it can create a sense of estrangement and perhaps might make the patient feel controlled by devices. So how do you move forward? So I'm invoking what some theorists in the space refer to as the social robot paradigm, and specifically social robots are basically situations where premised on the idea that humans and robots interact, and the purpose of AI is to actually enhance autonomy and create a sense of autonomy for human beings. And I have more on this, but it's been covered before, and I don't want to run too long because I want to get to my last point. But basically, the various authors have broken down social robots into three categories. But the most important category is the empathetic robot, right? The idea that the robot can actually identify someone's mental state and actually interact with the individual rather than simply evoke certain reactions. So a few interventions here on this front. So the first is that when creating AI devices, certain tools, and this is very, very rough, so I'm very interested in your feedback here. The first is that the goal should be that patients have as much control as possible over communications between the AI device and the doctor, right? So rather than having the doctor be acting as the intercessor between the device and the patient, we need to have the patient to the degree possible, right? And related to that, give the patient control to the degree possible over the settings and the modalities of the AI device. And so, so you have this sort of human in the loop design, right? Rather than push the human out of the loop. Now, we've got to be careful here, right? Because the first issue is that different patients will have different preferences. Right? Some of them will want as much control as possible. Some of them won't want control. And actually, like if you want your robot to go, get you tea, it'll be very irritating if you've got to sit there with the remote control, right, and go and have it pick up the tea, right? This is not what you want. So over time itself, you can imagine a situation where individuals' relationship with their AI device changes. I'm getting to time. All right. And then finally, we've got to think about situations where yes, we want patients to engage in choice, but the robot themselves the AI device must figure out ways to make sure that the choice being made is fully informed, because we are dealing with people who may have mental conditions, who have brain implants, who might be, having other issues. So some scholars have talked about empathetic robots that can identify a person's emotional state by analyzing facial features, speech patterns, even the levels of carbon dioxide on their breath. And so have the robot think about whether a person is overcome with strong emotions when they're issuing a command, and also maybe rely on cognitive bias research, right? So think about ways in which they can maybe produce displays that reinforce a patient's sense of self-worth before they make a decision, and so on and so forth. Of course, there are going to be limits to what we can do here, but introducing these ideas of social AI within medical AI paradigms, I think, will be useful. I'm not going to go into the last few issues because I think I'm out of time. But the last point I was going to make was basically to argue that in inverse, in the United States, this doesn't apply as much in Europe, but in the United States, medicine exerts what I call a civilizing influence on AI, because manufacturers have complete discretion or near complete discretion on the market when it comes to their how AI operates. But the minute it becomes AI, medical related, then they've got to respect autonomy, distributional, and other values within the American regime. So I'll stop there and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Konnoth. I invite to the floor Professor Rigazio, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks to the DIVE team for organizing this event and offering us once again this great opportunity in this beautiful setting. So I should have slides. Yes, thank you. So the topic I'm going to present today, why are you laughing? Is slightly different from the previous one. So is the, okay. So this is the result of the joint effort by Professor Alessandra, Pera, and me, who couldn't be here today for other commitments with our university. So, and it addresses a very specific aspect of the interaction between artificial intelligence and human vulnerability, which is specifically the emotional vulnerability that arises when someone uses what is called an AI girlfriend. So, why this topic? Because, well, essentially there are two reasons. One is that these tools are increasingly gaining importance in terms of market share. And the second one is that quite recently some national data protection authorities have started to investigate on these tools. So as I will try to explain, there are of course potential benefits in using this kind of tools, as well as potential risks that are creating often a subsequent situation of emotional dependency on the user, and which in turn creates some unrealistic expectations and so gender-based control in real life relationships. And a real protection comes therefore only with a better design process and policy. So just to get an idea of what we're talking about when we introduce this topic of AR girlfriends, these are basically chat boxes that uses voice, text, or images that use large language models and basically reproduce human-like conversations. The statistics actually show that the average user is a man, a young man, usually it's single, and he is often dissatisfied with real-life relationships. And of course, this is just an average idea. But what can he do with this AI girlfriend? Well, basically, he can do everything he wants. So he can decide her appearance, her personality, and most importantly, her behavior. And what is the result? Of course, it's a more immersive and personalized experience. Among the potential benefits, the studies show that, of course, there are some positive results, luckily. And these are, for example, friendships. So they increase friendships, companionship. Also, they give comfort to lonely people. This is an important aspect we don't have to forget. Like they give a safe space. And of course, this kind of tool is also used very often in the educational context, like, for example, when learning a foreign language, like an AI companion. These are usually the ones. So when it comes to potential risks and harms, there are, of course, several disadvantages. What are they? Well, actually, the most evident is that they can generate, and they do generate, emotional dependency. Of course, there are others which are consistent, for example, with violent language. So there is very often language where it's very violent, and violent advices. And of course, there are also other kinds of harms, which, for example, are potential cyber attacks or scams, or, of course, data breach. And most importantly, they reinforce and they reflect gender stereotypes. They are usually reinforcing biases and gender-based violence. And so, of course, we assist in front of this a girlfriend to the vulnerability exploitation of the user, and of course reflecting an idea of gender stereotypes. So there is this also emotional dependency, which of course is an example of this we can find in Replica. Well, Replica is actually the most vivid example of this AI girlfriend. Is one of the most popular chatbots at present. Of course, there are many on the market, but this one has recently become quite famous because it was the object of an investigation by the Italian National Data Protection Authority. And actually, the National Data Protection Authority investigated on this emotional vulnerability. So it actually underlined this kind of harmfuls. And what is interesting here is that, as you can see also from the terms of service that are that Replica actually uses, it says that Replica has the right to modify or discontinue temporarily or permanently the service with or without notice. And also that Replica will not be liable to you for any modification, suspension, or discontinuance of any of the service. And why is this so important? Also because Replica is sold as a mental wellness app. So as we can easily imagine, if it's a mental wellness app, apparently and supposedly, but a sudden discontinuation of the service could actually cause a trauma on the user, and so abandonment issues. And of course, it's pretty clear that here we are in front of a situation where dependency is created. So, for example, the user is not allowed to delete the app. If he tries, for example, the AI girlfriend started begging him not to do that, and there's an escalation of conversations. So, yeah, I just reported some of them. What about the unrealistic expectations? So usually when users have this idealized version of a partner, right? But this is not what actually reality shows or actually is. And so they have this idealized version, and real life partners should conform in their mind to this kind of expectations. And what if, of course, the reality is never as we have imagined, but also what if the partner does not want to conform to those expectations? And also the fact that it's pretty clear here that this kind of tools reinforce gender-based control, so violence based on gender, of course, but they perpetuate the idea of stereotypes that we actually see in everyday life. and an abusive behavior. They encourage actually also toxic interactions between partners and exchanges that of course are and set the trigger for other violent behavior. There's some of examples that are taken by Replica. So the fact that they humiliated the partner, for example, and so on. So of course, there are themes here that we don't have time to dig into, but of course, there's a privacy issue here. So what about, also because the privacy issue is strictly related to the theme that is at the center of this issue. So, and what about this data? So here we're dealing with data that historically has been made inaccessible, because we're talking about a so much private and intimate sphere of the person, right? So it's the emotional sphere. So just think if there's a breach, a data breach, and then someone, and the data is hacked, someone stole the data, steals the data, and actually later the user is a victim of revenge, for example, using this data. So eventually there is also a privacy issue that must be investigated. And there's also the consumer protection side. So in this case, there's pretty clear unbalanced situations, so an unfair practice, an information asymmetry between the user and the chat box itself. And again, it's in terms of emotional vulnerability of the user. Therefore, while of course we are all aware of the fact that we cannot find a pretty fast solution, and that this implies really many aspects of investigation, and but I think that first of all we have to be equally aware of the fact that an action is needed in this matter, and that moreover it's possible to act, it's possible to intervene. This action should be actually, and should go beyond the single measures. So not only thinking to the vulnerable consumer, for example, or just only to the privacy issue, but one that, for example, intervenes before, so ex ante, with a perspective that looks at before. So one that goes directly on the design of the instrument. So what is considered essential here is to emphasize that when we talk about design, it's not just a simple technical gesture, okay? It's a choice. It's really a choice to actually defend and respect the dignity of the user, and also to stop. So, for example, to respect the dignity of the user, but at the same time that this user can use freely the tool, but however, this same user itself in turn must understand and be stopped whenever, for example, his behavior violates the rules. So, and this action, of course, is the result not only by the intervention of the law. It requires a level of education, a shared education among people, and also the intervention of the public sphere, a public intervention, because it's a common responsibility. And therefore, concretely, since we always look at something that is concrete and not just only theory, so when something like what I showed before in the slides happens, it should be like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rigazio. I will leave the floor to Professor Ferrari, please.
Okay, I also have slides. Perfect. So thank you for giving me the floor. Thanks for organizing this special event. I'm gonna start directly because time is running fast. So I'm gonna talk about artificial intelligence in relation to medical devices. So connecting also somehow to your previous contribution. And I'm gonna talk about it from an ethics committee because maybe I shouldn't say it loud, I'm a member of an ethics committee. And I know that it's not so much appreciated from people working in the health sector for many reasons. And I'm gonna try, and I'm the first one being critical to the work we are doing. And I'm gonna give examples for these critiques, and I'm gonna try to give also a partial solution. But before coming to that, I would like to give an overview about medical devices, including AI. Somehow it was already given, no, not somehow, it was already given an introduction to this. I'm gonna touch also on some other aspects. When we have medical devices, we all know that a certain procedure for authorization have to come. One goes through the ethics committees, and one goes through health ministries or the different regulation, or the different procedures which are established at national level. Within these procedures, certain pieces of regulation, certain rules have to be taken into account. One of those is the medical device regulation, or better, the medical device regulations. One is on medical devices solely, and the other one is on in vitro medical devices. These are the two regulations she was also quoting. They were enacted in 2017. They came into force in 2021. This regulation dictate the rules for medical devices. Then other rules, I'm not gonna enter into specific, I'm just giving you the overview of the complexity that we have in the health sector. The other regulation, which is super important and has to be taken into account, is the one on CE marking. We all remember during the pandemic that we were looking for the CE stamp on our masks, either CE stamp or reference to regulation, European regulation or international standards. Basically, the CE marking regulation states that whenever a medical device is considered okay, is approved within one European member state, it can be sold as medical device also in any other European member state. Another important, obviously important directive is the Product Liability Directive, which was amended by Directive 34 in 1999, and which has to be interpreted for medical devices in light of the European Commission Blue Guide, which was enacted in 2022, which sets the rules again for medical devices. Then we also have technical standards. Technical standards are not mandatory, but they may become mandatory. Technical standards are the rules which are made by manufacturers, basically, because there's always a strong component of manufacturers between those who sit at the table and dictate these rules. Technical standards can be international, European, national, can belong to different levels. As I said, they're not compulsory, but usually the European Union, on a regular basis, adopts an umbrella regulation which turns technical standards into law, into regulation, so it makes them compulsory. Technical standards are not included in the European regulation on medical devices because the EU was trying to to make rules which were somehow flexible. In other terms, the European Union thought that including standards, technical standards, into a regulation would have made the regulation obsolete very soon, because technical standards continually change in light of the engineering and technical developments. So in order to avoid changing the regulation continuously, they decided to make a regulation on medical devices which was referring to technical standards which were external to the European regulation. Lastly, we have the European Artificial Intelligence Act. We already talked about that. Already Professor Cascini was talking about that in relation to medical devices, so I'm not quoting the piece of the regulation of the today it's still a proposal, but very soon it's gonna become a regulation. In any case, also this regulation is taking into account medical devices. So we see that the complexity of the legal framework surrounding medical devices. There are so many different layers of regulation that need to be taken into account. And today I'm gonna focus on the work of ethics committee during this kind of evaluation. Ethics committee are compulsory. Their opinion is compulsory before a medical device can be marketed and can be used. They have to evaluate, the evaluation, the investigations better done by ethics committee are of two types. One is the pre-market investigation, and the other one is the post-market investigation. Pre-market is for those medical devices that have not been used yet. So the ethics committee must look at the device, look at the study related to the use of the device, and taking into account the complex legal framework I was referring to, has to decide whether a study is safe or not for patients. Post-market investigations, instead, are usually sponsored by manufacturers, so they are done for follow-up investigations, for commercial reasons, for marketing reasons, and so on, but also for renewing the authorization they may have already obtained. So on top of the legal references that I gave you before, the ethics committee has also to take into account all the ethical reference text which are dealing with medical devices. And these are the Oviedo Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine, the international standards which include, from 2020, which include the principle of good clinical practice, and the Declaration of Helsinki, which is related to ethical principles for medical research on human patients, on human subjects. So the framework is becoming even broader and even more complex. Within this framework, what are medical devices? My predecessors were already given the legal definition, so I'm just quoting it quickly. So basically, according to the European Regulation on Medical Devices, a medical devices, or better, a product including software, has to be considered a medical device if the software is used for medical purpose. Otherwise, it's to be considered a consumer, lifestyle, or well-being application. This is the composition of the ethics committee I'm a member of. I'm the only legal expert. I don't know whether I'm an expert, but I'm the only one with a legal background. Only one legal expert per ethics committee is supposed to sit in the committee. But as we said, there are a lot of legal there's a lot to know about legal issues. There are a lot of legal knowledges and competences that are required in order to give this evaluation. But when we decide, my vote, we take majority votes. So my vote equals the vote of all the others, which have no legal competence and which decide only by, you know, by heart. By heart, I don't know, by gut feeling. Yeah, by gut feeling it's better. So I'm gonna give you one example of one of thousands of cases that I've been seeing during my work there. Obviously, I'm bounded to secrecy, so I'm not giving names of study practices of anybody, but I want to give you an example of a case because I think that it shows how I think it's not appropriate how the ethics committee is organized. There was this case, which was a very interesting case we had to judge, including persons, individuals over 65, which were offered a house from the community. The community was giving a whole house, and with the only requirement for these individuals to wear a smartwatch. And they wanted to take all personal data referring to their lifestyle habits, so whether they were walking or jogging or sleeping in front of TV, how many sleeping hours, how much oxygenated was the blood, temperature during the day, that kind of information. There were no patients. There were simply individuals over 65. The ethics committee was blocking this study, which, in my opinion, could have given some insight into how we should behave in order to age better, because the ethics committee was thinking that that smartwatch was a medical device, even though, in accordance to the regulation from 2017, it was not. It was a lifestyle app. So the ethics committee was saying, no, this is a medical device, and because it's a medical device, we require the presence 24/7 of an in-house doctor. We require some previous psychological tests on these patients, but there were no patients. And they were requiring a lot of additional measures to be taken because they were thinking this whole project was falling in the health sector. So my conclusion is that we have to educate both the participant to these ethics committees. There are 44 ethics committees in Italy, and more or less it's the same all over Europe, and they are appointed by the region, and we have to change the composition of these boards because there has to be either better legal education on the members or more legal experts to avoid this kind of mistakes. I was giving a mistake of a case which maybe is not giving huge detrimental outcomes to everybody. But believe me, we are taking so many decisions. In my region, our committee is deciding something like 300 cases every month, and they're really life-saving decisions taken on medical devices which may be life-saving and which are banned or not accepted because of mistakes from the legal point of view. So, yeah, the vulnerability here is not. It is the vulnerability of patients which are discriminated because of erroneous mistakes in the application of law. So my point is that we need to change the overall organization of this ethics committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So time for discussion, questions, please.
Thank you very much to all the panel. Very, very interesting. I have two comments or two questions in relation to the second presentation, Professor Konnoth. You mentioned in your presentation as a key message your idea that using AI system for the purpose of changing this relationship between the patient and the doctor, in a way we have an empowered patient. And then you go to the next point, talking about in a way that previously there was a vulnerability of the patient, and then in a way disappear, is alleviated. And finally, you talk about the need of control, the patient in control. And when you were describing that, I immediately come to my mind exactly the same analysis that we have, we are at the moment using in the Eli project that I very briefly mentioned in my presentation with consumers and the relationship with traders. I know that is very questionable. I know there is a debate, and probably some of you disagree with me, but I have as well this idea, exactly as you mentioned, that consumer using AI system as agent or assistant could be in the future empowered consumer. And in a way, the asymmetry, the traditional asymmetry between consumer and traders is repaired or is alleviated. And I agree, I come now to my point, to the extent that we guarantee this control that you mentioned before. My point is, in our project, we are proposing the idea that this kind of AI agent should comply with certain design requirement. And this design requirement has to guarantee precisely control, the control. So just my comment is, do you see this parallelism that I'm pointing out, and to which extent you think that design requirement could be a way to guarantee this idea? And then I have another comment, if I may, Professor Cascini, to the second. Please.
Oh, absolutely. So I really wanted to get to my last point, but I did want to sort of talk about the design principles here, but also the regulatory aspects. So in the United States, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, looks at safety and efficacy, right? Will the product do what it says without killing people, right? But it would not be considered competent to look at these other aspects, right? So if you've got just a robot helping a patient, the FDA doesn't regulate that, So when we're talking about the social interaction aspects of AI in healthcare spaces, right? Should there be other people on FDA committees? Should there be more FDA committees? The FDA doesn't have an ethics committee, by the way. Is that right? I'm looking at the other Americans in the room, and so basically, right? To what degree? Because the ethics committees happen at the institutional stage, but Pfizer and Merck aren't subject to the same requirements. So universities are. So the universities have ethics committees, but Pfizer and Merck aren't by law required to have them, right? But I'm sure very ethical. So anyway, the point is though, so should the FDA also increase its competence to think about that, and not just focus on safety and efficacy?
Thank you very much. And if I may, just another point in relation to Dr. Rigazio presentation. I like very much the question, the terms that you were posing in order to show how this emotional bond could be frustrated and so. So my question is, have you considered that now these terms could become unfair because they are, in a way, compromising or exploiting this emotional dependency? So it's a new kind of unfairness, maybe?
Yeah. Well, the idea was that, even though I think it would be difficult to prove, but yes, the idea is to also look at this as a complex problem, as I said. So this is a part of the problem. So the consumer vulnerability here, but it's a vulnerability that's an emotional vulnerability that arises from this unfairness, I guess. So yeah, that could be, yes. Yeah, interesting one.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please.
Sure. I have a question for Sara Rigazio, just out of the blue. How would you put this AI girlfriend in the same category as pornography? I'm thinking of McKinnon working, or not. Not on the point of view of dignity of the user, but of stereotype, gender stereotype? And second, are there any boyfriend AI?
Are you looking for that?
Um, well, at the moment, we could see that the most vivid example is for AI girlfriend. So that's why it's stereotyped. That's why it's a gender-based stereotypes. And I guess that, and my view is that 90% of this AI are girlfriends, not boyfriends. Otherwise, there would be just AI companions. So another kind of, just the one that I mentioned before in the educational context. So nothing like that. I wouldn't say pornography, but I would say instead that it reinforces gender stereotypes and biases. So maybe not just pornography like that, but it's more in a in a sphere that reinforces these biases in gender-based. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a follow-up of Bianca's comments to some extent. So, in what sense, in your presentation, you focus on the vulnerability of the user, mainly. But it's interesting, in gender studies, there are some works. We published an article a couple of years ago on Computer Law and Security Review on the role of gender in this kind of services, we can say. So, from my perspective, the vulnerable subject is not just the user, but is the category that, in this case, the women, but maybe also other categories that are affected by this representation of their gender or their category. And so, from legal perspective, the question is, what is the room for a sort of collective protection? Because I understand the aspect of the user, but the big impact is not just on the user, but on the fact that you continue this stereotype and this vision of the women in the context, in social context. So gender studies are very sensitive on the, and also feminist studies are very sensitive on this topic. And so I think that when we talk about vulnerability, we should focus more on the people that are affected by this kind of representation, in this case of the women, but maybe also, by the way, this very strict relationship between gender and sex is also a matter of discussion. So.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, this was the point, but everything comes and starts from the vulnerability of the user and the fact that he is not, or she is not, stopped when the user reinforces this kind of stereotypes, because otherwise the result is what you said, that it's a vulnerability that actually is about an entire collectivity. And that's why I called for design process, and that's why I think it's a more common responsibility. So it's not just, but if we don't stop this kind of reinforcing action and stereotypes at the beginning, that's the result is exactly what you said. So yeah, the vulnerability is also what you are describing, but it's a consequence of what it started at the beginning, because otherwise it wouldn't even be a vulnerable collective groups, because design would have stopped this at the beginning.
Design is an ex-ante approach, we can say. But from a legal perspective, what is the ex-post collective protection?
Well, of course, if there is, the legal system needs a reaction as well, of course. But, well, the point is to prevent it, not to get to that point. So, that's...
But these products are valuable. So, don't want to monopolize the discussion. The problem is, I fully agree on the ex-ante approach. Of course, it's much better than ex-post reaction. But due to the fact that we have many of these products, including online avatar, etc., that replicate this model, is a question, but it's not mandatory. So in your project, have you investigated the possibility to have a legal protection as a category in the case in which these products are available? Because of course, if we prevent it through design, by the way, I don't know how much is possible, because representing women in some forms is not necessarily discrimination, is not necessarily something that can be classified as prohibited. So the problem is, but if it's done, the category per se has any voice in terms of protection? This is, but maybe it's not part of your research.
No, but we will look at this. Okay, thanks.
I also wanted to make a question, but just if I may say, the Digital Service Act is a solution to that problem. I mean, it's from today, I don't know whether you saw on the news that the European Union has taken a stance against Meta for the protection of minors, for the discriminatory use of social networks. So there are already some regulations and some pieces of law which can be used in order to give an ex-post protection. In any case, sorry for adding, but my question was for Professor Cascini. You were showing us some numbers related to trust, and I wanted to ask you what was the context? Like, were they taken from Italy only or Europe?
No. It is a systematic review of the literature with all the studies published all over the world in the scientific journals. So we selected inclusion criteria to include the studies, but it is an overview of all the expectations of people who participated to these studies all over the world. The distributions comparing countries is most oriented in the occidental Western countries. Yes.
An age group?
The age group is very different. An interesting study was focused on the Finnish in Finland. It was realized in Finland, and it was focused on postgraduate students. And it was an experiment because they tested the students before receiving an education on data sharing and after have received an education on data sharing, and the answers were completely different. They were more confident after the education, and it is a very good news because they were more confident with sharing data for secondary purposes, so for sure, after the education. So the message is we need to communicate with people what are the benefits of the secondary use of data, and also communicate better what are the protections, because people are worried about these protections because they listen a lot of information, and very conflicting information, and this is not good. We should avoid this, especially regarding artificial intelligence. This is the era of misinformation. Yeah. So we need to work on that.
So I guess, to pile on, I've got a question for you and then a question for the group as a whole. So I was kind of wondering, so how do you draw the line in these situations, right? So let me give you a hypothetical given the range of robots we've talked about or AI entities we've talked about. So imagine an AI entity that's designed to help a senior person at home. But senior people of a certain age and, let's say, political tendency in the United States would be more comfortable with a certain sex doing certain tasks at home, right? So you have only women and women's voices being programmed to do this, right? Because otherwise, you know, I don't want to stereotype people, but you can imagine the person I'm talking about would just feel uncomfortable with a man performing household tasks or whatever it is, right? So to what degree does does, for example, the gender like the gender non-stereotyping issue work? Are there certain kinds of AI functions where we need to instill those principles and certain others that we don't? And so that's one question. And then the second, because it fits into a broader question that I'm going to pose it to the panel as a whole, which is we've talked about, you know, we've talked about different contexts, but within our context, we've talked about how we need to put into place principles to regulate the behavior of AI, right? So there's the technical regulation, and you can think about the medical regulation of safety and efficacy, but let's put that together, right? The technical aspects, the ISO standards, the interaction, but at a chemical level between the, you know, the electrical level and so on. But then the social norms, right? So can we think about trans-contextual social norms that should determine the interaction? So Asimov's laws of robotics or whatever it is, right? But something more detailed where we think about the social norms that should dictate, right? So, you know, AI technology cannot be sexist, for example, and so on and so forth. So, you know, so across contexts. So that's the second question to the panel as a whole. But then I'll
No, sorry. No, I would like just to say something that connects to the last intervention, but also to what we said before concerning the girlfriend issue. So I was wondering, in particular, what Alessandro Mantelero said. Assume that there is really a market for these girlfriends, and that as a user I can choose what kind of girlfriend I want to interact with. Then there is a problem of protection of the user. Maybe this kind of thing is additive, it is bad, precludes the human relationship, so this would be a kind of paternalistic intervention, it may be justified. But when maybe it is exploitation, when my data are used in ways that I don't like or that I don't understand, but not necessarily. So if I choose the kind of girlfriend I want to interact with, is a choice that may be damaging for me, but is a choice that I have done. Should it be prohibited? And also with regard to the kind of girlfriend I want to interact with, does it need to be a progressive girlfriend in such a way that my kind of regressive attitudes are so is the kind of forced education that I should go through, or am I free to choose based on the impact that having this kind of social, this kind of stereotypes would do on me? So we have two possible ways of imposition for progressive purposes: paternalism toward the user and a kind of restriction on the selection with regard to the partner. It seems to me it's a bit different from the case of when you are accessing getting stereotypes to Google, because in this case it's not a choice, in this case it will be a choice. So I think a very difficult issue to address. I don't know if you have considered this interaction between freedom of choice and constraints.
Yeah, of course, but I think that, well, what we're looking into this project is not just, the problem arises when users have this idea of their AI girlfriend, and it's a stereotyped one, full of biases, and they actually think that this is the one they want to have in real life. So, and they maybe pretend that a real partner actually is like the AI girlfriend. So this is another level. So we actually, the design process wouldn't impose anything, because actually it's like it reinforces just a bias or a stereotype. So I don't know if, but of course freedom of choice is something that I guess it's at the base. That's why I said that probably respecting the dignity of the user is dignity means also respecting his freedom of choice, of course.
And I think Bianca's point was excellent here, raising McKinnon, right? Because McKinnon doesn't require that the woman who's engaging in pornography be vulnerable and oppressed, right? But yeah, but what do you think more generally about the feminist? To go back to my question, if you don't mind, what do you think about the issue of let's say. Yeah, and sort of general social norms of interacting with AI.
I think the first question you ask about the fact that maybe elderly people would like to have a stereotype, but I think that this is slightly different from AI girlfriend. It's just an AI companion, like the one that among the potential benefits I mentioned, like some friendship to lonely people, comfort. So it's slightly different.
But, no, I agree with you. It's different, but I guess the question. So like one of the jokes we have in like in courts in the U.S. is like a judge will say, "Oh, what about this case?" and the lawyer's like, "Well, that's not this case, right?" But I am kind of curious because I can totally see the argument on one hand to say, "Well, look, they're elderly, whatever it is, we're going to forgive their discrimination." On the other hand, we can say, "Look, as a social norm, we don't want this," and so I not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious. Like I don't know the answer, and maybe yeah, okay, fair enough. That's fine.
Oh, is there any time for another question? Or? Oh, thank you. Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. I mean, just fascinating presentations, and I mean, I wanted to try to draw a bridge between Professor Patrizio and Professor Konnoth's presentation because I tend to think of what these entities are doing. It reminds me of Althusser's theory of hailing. They're sort of calling you out as a certain type of person. And I'm wondering about the connections there because when I was thinking about the AI in medical context, like if it's actually in like it's performing a therapeutic role, my approach, like in my New Laws of Robotics book, was just to say it's got to be an adjunct to a professional. So as long as a professional is supervising it, then we can give it a lot of latitude. But what I worry a lot about, and this gets to the AI girlfriend example, I think, is there was recently some new books about people who take on medical identities from TikTok. Okay, so someone will be watching TikTok and say, "Wow, I'm autistic. This person who's autistic, I'm very similar." And a book was written about this, and the person was saying, there are these case studies where someone said, "Wow, my daughter started acting more and more autistic as she took it on as an identity from TikTok." Right? And I thought this is such an interesting idea in terms of medicalization, right? How that might occur. And so my idea was just that I think it's just so fascinating because within the medical profession, you can tightly regulate these things. And you can do things like I propose in the New Laws of Robotics book to make them simply an adjunct to a human professional with human judgment and responsibility. But given free expression laws, it's often going to be extremely difficult to regulate the TikToks, the AI girlfriends, because in my view, I don't think those are necessarily biased by any particular ideology. I don't think that there's an ideology behind Replica or Xiaoai or TikTok, et cetera. But I think there's both collateral benefit, but a lot of collateral damage of people being sort of drawn in and called out as a particular type of person. And just to connect your presentation to Marta Bertosol's earlier, the idea from Bertosol's presentation of AI as the narcissistic mirror, I love that. And that's the cover of a recent book called Deceitful Media. It shows sort of this narcissistic thing. And that's what I worry about so much is that it's so delicate as to whether the AI is going to start supporting you, but are they going to support your worst aspects of your character or the best? And that is something that I think actually China is trying to regulate right now. I think China actually sees that and with a strong state wants to regulate. I worry that a lot of liberal democratic states that don't want to interfere at all are going to end up in quite a dangerous situation where they can just end up having the worst aspects of human nature continually reinforced if that makes a little more money for companies than reinforcing the better aspects, the better angels of our nature. And that's something that comes out of actually Thomas Russell Gilbert's stuff working with Stuart Russell on the political economy of reinforcement learning. There's a great conference on that. And I think that political economy of reinforcement learning really shows that we're in a dangerous situation now because in a lot of Europe, the US, et cetera, it's all driven by profit. So I think that's why this conference is so important because we've got to pull it back, I think, from just a purely profit motive. And we've got to have a situation where you can say there are things we want to cultivate here. Thanks.
Oh yeah, please, yeah. So because I just want to, so I think, no, Frank, I think that's a really interesting distinction because I think though, in some ways, the distinction is that is precisely that in the medical context, where we're thinking about AI in medical devices, there is no act of hailing. You've already been hailed, right? And it's already been determined that you are a patient. I think in when it comes to the love robots, right? There is that interaction that you're referring to, where it kind of reinforces your worst angels, right? And just makes you a worse and worse person, and sort of calls that out. But I think that what I am suggesting is that precisely like the inverse, that medical devices have good hailing, right? That they try and sort of bring out to the degree your autonomous side. But I think this dichotomy where you think about AI interactions as not involving the construction of identity in the individual versus some kind of, I think that is what distinguishes, I think, the social robots, right, and the social robot model from sort of general AI models, if that makes sense.
Please, two brief comments, because Professor Ferrari, you mentioned something before that we have not referred the application of the DSA to those cases of the AI girlfriend. And it's very interesting because if we can apply the DSA, because we consider that in a way it's a kind of platform, so the platform where you create your own avatar or the avatar of your girlfriend. So we could apply, for example, content moderation. And this is something, Sara, that you could apply in your study, no? How we can apply the takedown mechanism, the report mechanism, the content moderation in order to mitigate situation, for example, of sexism or violence. So in the case that we consider that this is not purely an agent, but is a platform, and therefore we can apply that. That would be probably the obstacle. In relation to your point of to which extent we have social norms that can be transcontextualized, in the AI Act, a point that has been highly criticized is that the AI Act starts with a very high-level approach. So AI should comply with democratic values, human rights, etc., etc. And then at the very end says, and standards has to be implemented for the purpose of ensuring compliance with these high-level values. So in a way, there is a huge gap between values such as human rights, and then we have the regulation, and then we have standards that are going to ensure that AI and algorithm are designed in a way that is complying with human rights. So in a way showing what I think that you were asking, no? To which extent we can use this different level approach in order to have common understanding of how these kind of systems should comply or should operate. I don't know if that helped for our discussion.
No, that really helps. I mean, I really hope that the EU does something because, as Frank points out, right, in the US, there are the First Amendment standards where, and I'm not actually familiar with First Amendment and software interaction, but I know that there's been stuff written about it. But I suspect that manufacturers can very easily say, sorry, this is the way we are creating our product, and, you can't. And I think the Supreme Court would be quite receptive to it. Yeah.
If I may, I would like to answer just with a consideration about the healthcare sector and the standards that we should apply for health. It is not so distant, the level of the standards from the level of the principles, because what we are doing, we are trying to build something which is safe and which is secure. That is the base of what we are doing, for instance, for the drug experiments or other kind of scientific research. So when we are going to apply the rules from the AI Act, which is a very high-level regulation and very horizontal, but at the end, it is focused just on use cases. So you can apply your use cases and you can use the standards and you can build your standards strictly related to the purpose and to the use case that you are going to implement. So there is not a general need to create general standards because your standards are very focused on the use that you need to apply your technology. I don't know if it's clear, the idea.
May I add something in this regard? Standards, when you talk about standards and you talk about algorithms, you also have to take into account the data set, because algorithm is nothing without that. And sorry for quoting again another piece of regulation, but Europe has adopted other two regulations, which are the Data Act and Data Governance Act, which are basically saying that if you have a package of data, you have to make it available for other users, secondary users especially. And having these two regulations, the package becomes more comprehensive and less biased. And so if you put together all these regulations, then AI becomes more reliable and there should be more trust.
And mostly the European health data space.
Yeah.
For the healthcare sector, because it is a special law for the healthcare sector.
I agree. Thank you so much. Yes.
So we will have our dinner at the second floor below, I think, and it will be at 7:50, so that we have the time. 7? No.
8:50. It's 7:35.
50. 50. 7:50. No. 7:50. At 8 we will start with our dinner.